I'm taking a look at President Trump's Twitter feed, and he talks about the fact that US-China have taken a big leap forward. He talks about his relationship with President Xi. He talks about agriculture and the fact that China will start to import agricultural produce from the US. This almost makes it seem like this is a done deal.
Well, I think there are three narratives going on right now. You have the Chinese narrative, the statement they put out that talked about consultation, one China, all sorts of things, but quite different from the White House communique. And what's unusual about that is generally after the meeting, they'll hammer out a joint communique. In this case, they didn't. The third narrative, of course, is Donald Trump, who even contradicted the White House narrative. He mentioned things that were not included, including this idea that China was going to drop all tariffs on U.S. cars being exported to China. There's nothing on the Chinese side of that, in fact, and there's nothing in the White House things. So it's difficult. I would agree with Eunice. There's a sense here that there's a very, very wide gap. Now, when you analyze this and you're looking at this from a business perspective, you have to ask a question. Is Donald Trump's aim to contain China, in which case this is going to be a very, very long-term situation, and this is just a temporary truce? Or is it really about solving the trade deficit, in which case this could be resolved? If you know the answer to that question, you have a pretty good idea of what's coming next.
Well, I don't know if you do have the answer to that question, but what would your best bet be, Einar? Is this about containment or is this about the deficit?
Well, I mean, it's very interesting. There's a tug of war within the White House. There are those, almost all of them believe that China needs to be brought into the liberal democratic capitalist world order. But there's a real thing. So if you look at Lighthizer, Miller, Navarro, and Bolton, they believe that China has to be contained and that the U.S. has one opportunity, that is now, to rebuild the world around the United States. And that would mean that literally the United States would be the hub and that there would be a spoke, which would be a bilateral deal going out to every country in the world. So imagine it like a bicycle wheel with many spokes going out to different countries. I don't think that China shares this view. I think many other countries do not share this view. This is not just between China and the U.S. Remember, everybody else has felt the wrath of Donald Trump in terms of tariffs, especially on aluminum and steel. So I do believe that Donald Trump has a lot of sympathy towards the view that he has to be a strong man and reform the world around the U.S. I think that is, in fact, the answer, and that unfortunately means that this is going to be a long, drawn-out process. Expect a lot of volatility as we come up to the 90 days. Remember, last year, they had 100 days to come up with it. The difficulty there is that China has a different economic and political system, and that is not something that any country is going to reform in 100 days, even under the pressure of the world's largest country.
You're absolutely right on that. In fact, I go back again to President Trump's tweets, and he says, President Xi and I have a very strong and personal relationship. He and I are the only two people that can bring about massive and very positive change on trade and far beyond between our two great nations. A solution for North Korea is a great thing for China, and all to the point that Einar was making. But Einar, before I let you go, on the issues that are on the negotiating table, from tariffs to agriculture, where do you really see, China not backing down?
Well, they can't back down on state-owned enterprises. I mean, and they're not going to back down on their political system. The one-party system is what they have been successful using for the last 40 years since the opening up. In fact, this is the 40th year of their anniversary, and they look at the progress they make. So they're not going to abandon their political system nor their economic system. Now, on the other hand, they are rapidly opening up. That has been speeded up. And there's a question in people's minds. Are they responding to the U.S., or are they simply see that the long-term situation requires them to replace the business that they believe is going to be irretrievably lost if this war continues?
Einar Tangent, always a pleasure. And as Einar was pointing out, it's a very different statement that's come in from the White House, different to what is coming from Chinese state media. There is no joint communique. And of course, President Trump's tweets convey a very different picture as well. So we do need to fill in the gaps and the blanks, so to speak. But it's a 90-day truce, at least for now. Einar, always a pleasure. Appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18. With that,